My grandson grew up, then my daughter-in-law kicked me out. But when I took my pension book with me, she panicked. Hello, everyone. My name is Marilyn Carter, and I'm 58 years old. Today, I want to share something that happened to me recently, something that has been weighing heavy on my heart. I'm still angry about it, and maybe telling my story will help me find a little peace. Maybe some of you have gone through similar things. Maybe you'll understand. 13 years ago, I lost my husband, Michael, to cancer. He had been the love of my life, and his death left a hole in my heart that never fully healed. At the time, our only child, our son Jeremy, had just turned 20. He was in his second year at the University of Oregon, and like any mother, I wanted to make sure he could stay in school and not worry about money. But things were tight, very tight. Back then, I was still working full-time as a machine operator at a manufacturing plant. It was a decent union job, and I was lucky to have it, but my monthly paycheck was just shy of $3,000. That wasn't nearly enough to cover Jeremy's tuition, dormitory fees, textbooks, and living expenses, not to mention our own household bills. To make ends meet, I started selling things at local flea markets after work. Socks, kids' toys, cheap sandals, anything I thought might turn a profit. I worked those booths in the freezing cold and the sweltering summer heat, but even so, the income was minimal. Barely enough to scrape by. During that time, my closest friend from church, Diane, suggested something that I wasn't initially open to. She said, "Marilyn, why don't you let me introduce you to someone? You don't have to be alone forever, and maybe a partner could help carry some of the burden." At first, I refused. The idea of dating again after losing Michael felt wrong. But then, I looked at Jeremy, still in college, still needing support, and I began to wonder if maybe having a companion wouldn't be such a bad thing. So I gave in. Over the next few months, Diane introduced me to a few men. Most were kind, a couple were odd, and one just talked about himself the entire time. But then I met Robert Harrison. Robert was 3 years older than me, a retired high school math teacher. He'd been a widower for 2 years and lived a quiet life in a small house on the edge of town. He wore wire-rimmed glasses, had kind eyes, and exuded a gentle, scholarly charm, so unlike my late husband, who was strong-willed and rough around the edges. Robert was calm, considerate, and attentive. He said to me, "You've got the look of someone who keeps a home full of warmth." I liked that. It wasn't long before we decided to live together. Not legally married, but sharing life as companions. Robert had 2 bedrooms in his home, one for us, and one reserved for his daughter, Rachel, who occasionally came home to visit. But we were respectful of her space, and she never gave me any trouble. My son, Jeremy, didn't approve of the arrangement. He didn't want me to officially marry Robert. He said he was worried Robert might be after the house my husband had left me. I tried to explain that Robert owned his own home, that he made more money than I ever did, and that he had no interest in my assets. But Jeremy wouldn't hear it. So, Robert and I chose not to marry. We just lived together in peace. Robert, being the generous man he was, gave me $3,000 every month for our household. I told him, "We don't even spend that much, $1. $500 is enough." But he smiled and said, "Then save the rest. Use it for yourself, or for your son. I don't mind either way." Thanks to his support, I was able to get Jeremy through college. He graduated at 24, and around that time, I also filed for retirement. My pension wasn't huge, about $2,800 monthly, but I was proud to have earned every cent of it. But Jeremy had trouble finding a job. Months passed and nothing stuck. So I told him he could come to Robert's house for meals. He refused. Said it was embarrassing. Instead, I handed over my pension checkbook and said, "Use this. Manage your expenses. Just let me know if you need help." He agreed. I didn't ask questions. About 6 months later, he landed a job in real estate, selling condos and suburban homes for a firm in Portland. I was so proud. I waited a bit, thinking he'd return my pension checkbook once he was stable. But when I asked for it, Jeremy said, "Mom, not yet. My girlfriend and I are just starting out, and things are expensive." His girlfriend, Alyssa, was a coworker. They had just started dating, and he didn't want to appear broke. I understood. I said nothing and let him keep the book. But then, 6 months later, Jeremy dropped a bombshell. Alyssa was pregnant. He asked me to prepare $25,000 as a dowry and help with the down payment for a new house. I was stunned. I told him, "Son, all I have is this house and my pension. That's it." But Jeremy insisted, "If we don't offer a dowry and buy a home, she'll terminate the pregnancy. I'll lose her, Mom." I couldn't bear to see my son devastated. So, I did the unthinkable. I sold the house Michael left me, used the money for the dowry, helped with their wedding, and paid part of their new home. When Alyssa gave birth to my grandson, Ethan, I was over the moon. I thought, all of this sacrifice, it was worth it. But then they came to me with another request. They wanted me to move in and raise Ethan. Alyssa had to go back to work after maternity leave, and they needed someone they could trust. I didn't want to leave Robert. He had been my rock, my comfort. I cried when I told him, but he said, "Go, raise your grandson. I'll be here, waiting. And when he's old enough, you come home." His words lit a candle in my heart. And so I went. I took care of Ethan full-time. I cooked, cleaned, did laundry, and paid for groceries out of my pension. My pension had now increased to $3,200 a month, enough to keep things afloat. Jeremy and Alyssa never gave me a dime, but I didn't complain. They were building their lives. I wanted to help. Robert would call from time to time, always reminding me to care for myself. "I'll be here," he'd say, "waiting." But life doesn't always go as planned. When Ethan was 5, Robert had a stroke, a severe hemorrhage. He passed away before I could even get to the hospital. I was shattered. I cried every night. I regretted not being by his side, not sharing those final years together. If only I hadn't left. But I never told Jeremy or Alyssa. They never asked. They never noticed my grief. Why would they? I was just the live-in babysitter. Even when I fell sick, they didn't care. I cooked with a fever, cleaned with back pain. If I ever said I was tired, they frowned like I was ruining their day. Still, I stayed. I had no house anymore. Where could I go? Then, just 3 days after Ethan started first grade, something changed. We were at dinner. Suddenly, Alyssa smiled and said, "Mom, you've worked so hard. It's time for you to relax." I smiled, touched. I thought, finally, they appreciate me. But Jeremy cut in awkwardly. "What she means is, you can leave now, Mom. Ethan's in school. You don't have to stay." I froze. So that was it. My job was done. They had no more use for me. I didn't argue. I stood up and said, "Okay, I'll pack my things." Alyssa followed me into the guest room. "Mom, I think you misunderstood. We just don't want you to feel burdened anymore." I said nothing and kept folding my clothes. Then she added, "Also, it might be better if you leave your pension checkbook with us. You know how expensive school is for Ethan." I stopped folding. I looked her straight in the eye. "If I give you the checkbook, what will I live on?" Without blinking, she said, "Well, you live with your partner, right? He can support you." I turned slowly and said, "Robert passed away 2 years ago." Her mouth fell open. He died? You didn't tell us." "Would you have cared?" she stammered. "But you're alone now. Where will you go? Don't leave." I stared her down. "Would you want me to stay if I stopped paying for groceries, gas, water, trash pickup, and school supplies?" Her face turned hard. "Plenty of parents help their kids. Some give them $10,000 a month. You think you're generous?" I said nothing. I zipped my bag, walked past her, and out the door. I may not have a house anymore, but I have peace. I'll rent a small apartment. Sit by my own window. Sip tea without insults. Watch the birds and live quietly. Did I do the right thing? Thank you for listening to my story today. If you've made it this far, thank you for your heart and time. If any of this resonated with you, feel free to subscribe. I share more stories like this about life, aging, family, and survival. Let's walk this journey together. Let's grow older, wiser, and stronger together.
See you next time.